The death of Rube Foster in 1930, combined with the start of the Great Depression in the United States, caused the Negro National League to fold after their 1931 season. A second Negro National League was formed and began play in 1933. It contained more clubs in the East. Then 4 years later, the Negro American League was established. Foster's original vision for organized black baseball continued, and many of those great stars of the Negro Leagues, well, they were from Texas, the state where Rube Foster was born.
He was just so far ahead of the game, just so far ahead of the game. And his brilliance really had been lost until a museum like ours comes along to help you understand again. And that's the case for the Negro Leagues in general. You know, as my late mother would say, you don't know what you don't know. You know, and so through this museum, we're able to keep his legacy alive and hopefully in the process help people understand just how brilliant he was. And none of these brilliant minds transition into Major League Baseball. Just the players. Just the players. You know, you think about this. Buck O'Neil becomes the first African-American coach in Major League Baseball history in 1962. That's 15 years after Jackie breaks the color barrier. And as Buck would say himself, he was proud that he had gotten this coronation as the first black coach, but he said, I couldn't stick out my chest because I knew all of these other great black baseball minds who were more than capable of waving a guy home. They never got the opportunity. You don't get your first black manager until Frank Robinson, and your first black GM until Bill Lucas. You know, and this league was filled with all these brilliant baseball minds that never really got an opportunity. And that part of the story is often really not talked about at all. So the Negro Leagues, as I say in the podcast, they took one for the team. They took one for the team. There's no question about that.
So when we talk about the Negro League, so Rube Foster's team was the Chicago American Giants. We don't see or hear many Negro League teams in Texas. Was it because of segregation at the time?
You know, it's really interesting that the Negro Leagues didn't go any further west than Kansas City. But you think about this. Major League Baseball didn't go any further west than St. Louis.
St. Louis?
Yeah. So Texas, while it didn't have an official Negro Leagues team, Texas has a tremendous black baseball story. There were a lot of players from Texas that called the Negro Leagues home. I think over in Austin, the great Willie Wells. El Diablo, they named him when he was playing in Mexico because he would dig it out of the dirt, the devil. And Willie Wells was Ozzie Smith before we ever knew who Ozzie Smith was. But Willie Wells was a power-hitting shortstop, outstanding ball player, Smokey Joe Williams, in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Another great, unheralded, but mega talented star. I don't know if anyone threw harder than Smokey Joe Williams. Now, you might have had some that threw as hard. I don't know if anyone threw harder than Smokey Joe Williams. He once struck out 27 members of the Kansas City Monarchs in a game. They were playing under the night lights. Man, they couldn't touch it. And Chet Brewer, who was pitching for the Monarchs, struck out 19 in that game. Yeah, you know, did they need the pitch clock that day? Another Texan, Hilton Smith. Yeah, Hilton Smith in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. Also from Texas, from Giddings, Texas. And Hilton Smith did something that I don't think we will ever see again in the game of baseball. Hilton Smith won 20 games or more, 12 consecutive years.
Never happened again.
Won't happen.
Never happened.
It's hard to win 20.
Never happened
Yeah,
again.
no less. It's hard to get 20 in one season, period. 12 consecutive years.
You're up there with the 5'11", my son. Yeah, that's not gonna happen.
He went to Prairie View. He went to Prairie View. And the legend has it that the Prairie View baseball team cut him. That's like the high school coach that cut Michael Jordan. And then they were playing a local town team, and Hilton Smith was dominating them. And they asked, well, who is that kid? So that's the kid you cut. and they say the greatest curveball this game has ever seen. Buck O'Neil said Hilton Smith possessed the greatest curveball that he ever saw. Hall of Famer Monty Irvin said that you could know his curveball was coming, and the break on it was so sharp, you still couldn't hit it. And he threw that big 12-6 breaker, and then he dropped down 3/4 and throw what he called a tight curveball. Today we'd call it a slider. And he threw it all with pinpoint accuracy. And when he wasn't pitching for the Kansas City Monarchs, he played outfield and had a lifetime batting average over 300. He is rightfully enshrined in the National Baseball Hall of Fame. But since I'm here in the Dallas area, how in the world could I forget my main man, Ernie Banks?
Of course.
Dallas, Texas own. The legendary Cool Papa Bell saw him playing here, called Buck O'Neil and said, Buck, I got one for you. Buck said, can he pick it? Cool said, yeah, he can pick it. And Buck O'Neil basically signs Ernie Banks sight unseen based on Cool Papa Bell's recommendation, along with the late, great Bill Blair, who lived and died here in the Dallas area, was the longtime publisher of the Elite newspaper. I know here now they call it the Elite newspaper, but it was the Elite newspaper, inspired by the old Baltimore Elite Giants of the Negro Leagues. They send him to Kansas City. The rest is history. He played for Buck O'Neil, and when Ernie gets called up to go to the Cubs, he didn't want to leave. He wanted to stay there with the Kansas City Monarchs. And Buck and the other guys said, Ernie, you got to go. You have to go, because if you don't go, it's going to be challenging to get the next guy. See, what Ernie was fearful of, isolation. He knew he was going to be isolated when he got to Chicago. And he was right. Thankfully, Gene Baker, who had also played for the Monarchs, was there when Ernie gets there as well. See, Gene could have been the first to play for the Cubs, but he had sprained his ankle. And so Ernie beats him onto the field, but the two of them formed the Major's first all-black double-play tandem, Baker to Banks. And he was absolutely right. You see, in Kansas City, when the Monarchs played, everybody gonna go home, they're gonna get cleaned up, then they're gonna come out, they're gonna get dinner, they're gonna go to the nightclubs and listen to jazz. When he gets to Chicago, his teammates were going on wherever they were going, and they were relegated to the South Side to essentially fend for themselves. And he was afraid of that. But, you know, they pushed him out of the nest, and then the rest is history. He becomes Mr. Let's Play too, one of the most gregarious, outgoing, colorful baseball players of all time, who just so happens to be one of the greatest shortstops in Major League Baseball history.
In the spring of 2023, the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum announced plans to build a new 30,000 square foot facility in Kansas City. Bob Kendrick is the president of the museum, host of the podcast Black Diamonds, and he crosses the country telling the stories of legends whose accomplishments were lost for decades.
Please welcome Mr. Bob Kendrick.
So they made a t-shirt for you because you're just, this is what you do. You're telling stories, but you're telling American history that has been lost to so many people. And like Ken Burns, you're bringing it back and you're giving them education as well.
It's exciting, you know, number one, to earn this reputation as being a storyteller. But, you know, you think about storytelling as it relates to African American culture. That's essentially how we learned about ourselves. So your grandparents or your great-grandparents sat you down and they told you. They said, let me tell you about these ball players you should have known about. You know, and that's how we learned about ourselves, because our stories have never really been documented in the pages of American history books. And as it relates to the story of the Negro Leagues, for me to be a steward of the story and now to be one of the voices telling these stories, particularly since the likes of Monty Irvin, Buck O'Neill, these guys are all gone now. They were telling these stories years ago, and now I get to tell those stories, you know, in my role at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Man, and I enjoy it immensely. I really do. And that leads us to the fact that Rube Foster is now in a video game.
Seeing Rube Foster, he was such a mastermind both on and off the field. Swings and misses, struck him out.
Yeah, Rube Foster is in MLB The Show 23 as the game welcomed Negro League players into it for the first time. And I am narrating throughout the video game. Andrew Foster.
And there's a strike.
Now, who would have ever thought that old Bob would be in a video game? And it's really special because I have been overwhelmed by the reaction that not only the players are receiving, but the reaction to the stories that have been told as part of the gaming experience. And perhaps, Nui, I didn't realize just how big that digital platform really is.
You're going to be able to talk to some kids here, the Texas Rangers Youth Academy, and tell stories.
And now they can get access to this video game, and they can play as Rube Foster. So they get to throw the screwball, because nobody throws the screwball anymore. You know, puts too much torque on those arms. They got to protect those arms. And again, Rube perfected that pitch. I think the last great screwball pitcher was probably Fernando Valenzuela.
Right?
Yeah, was the last great screwball pitcher. No one throws that pitch anymore. And Rube dominated with that pitch. And so now you get to throw that pitch, and you get to learn about Rube Foster, and you get to learn about Satchel Paige.
This is the beauty of Bob Kendrick. I was inspired to tell a story because I vaguely knew about the brilliance of Rube Foster's Hall of Fame career. I was lucky enough to be on a tour that Bob Kendrick gave to Dallas-Fort Worth media members at the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum, Kansas City. And if you want to know more, I suggest reading the outstanding book, Rube Foster in His Time, by historian Larry Lester, who is also a founding member of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Nui Scruggs.